Today, I'm thrilled to kick off things with Antonia May Cross, Director of Communications and Campaigns at Revolving Doors. We'll be talking about Antonia's career, what makes her great at her job, and what she's learned and what's next on her journey. So let's dive in. Hi, Antonia. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
I'm really excited to be on. I'm a listener, so it's great.
Brilliant. So we'll just introduce you a little bit and then we'll have our chat. So Antonia has been working for over 15 years in specialist third sector communications, including senior roles in gaining public support for people in Bristol experiencing homelessness and sleeping rough during lockdown, and also establishing wider support for effective prison release and community safety during the prison capacity crisis. She has lived experience of the criminal justice system and homelessness, which has given her an urgency to use her strategic skills to further social justice causes. I'm so excited, Antonia. I know that we're going to have a really great discussion. And firstly, tell me a little bit about your career journey. How did you find your way into comms?
Thank you. I love being asked this question because it's good to shine a light on some of the more untraditional routes. So I hope someone else out there that may be feeling like they don't know what do they want to do with their life just happens to listen. But I was at school and I hated school. I hated school. I'd already been expelled once from a high school and then was also then expelled from a sixth form college. To add a bit of context, I was there on like a collection of social mobility bursaries, scholarships, and I already felt grateful to be there, but it just didn't quite gel for me. I was very conscious of being in a private school situation where I had a very different background. My mum was in touch with the justice system, been in custody and experienced community service. And I was largely raised by my grandparents with my beautiful sister. And I think there was a bit of a kind of dissonance between the school life I was living and my home life, which was also really proud to be born and raised in social housing and live in social housing now. And yeah, after I got expelled, I didn't know what I was going to do, but my nan was like, absolutely not. You're not sleeping on my couch with contribution nothing, which I think is a really familiar experience from some people from really working class backgrounds. Like there was no space for me in the home to just find my feet or do a course or kind of figure myself out for a bit, had to and contribute. And my nan was a Roman Catholic or kind of in touch with the Catholic faith and had a lot of church connections. And my mum was a housing officer at Taunton as well. So my route to my first charity was working with a homelessness charity in Taunton, which at the time was called Taunton Association for the Homeless. And they needed a photographer and someone to help with their website. And really, I was just picked because it was proximity to my mum and my nan, and they needed someone who was very young. It must have been like early 2010s. And I just said, yeah, I'll do it. And my mum was like, you better go and do something. And yeah, I helped them very early days set up their social media, really early days getting their contact list, which was in a Rolodex, onto the first ever, like, yeah, MailChimpy kind of thing. Maybe it wasn't even MailChimp, some sort of database, very manual entry. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew I enjoyed it. And I was like, oh, finally, like, can do this. And largely my entry to comms then was via that role. And even though I was considered the receptionist and admin person, I had a really cool CEO at the time called Justin Roxburgh, who was like, if we call you a communications coordinator, it envelopes what you're doing and we can make sure you do creative things and it will really help you with your career. Thank you, Justin Roxburgh. And yeah, it meant that really leaving school, I had scraped by A levels. After you're expelled, I was able to take them in a separate location by grace of my advocacy from my nan and everything. And it meant that I was a communications coordinator straight out of school. And I'll be honest, I had no idea what I was doing. It was largely to support fundraising at a very local organization or to get volunteers or even very basic things like putting up signs in one of the hostels to make sure that people who were kind of the service users, as we called them, at that place. And I worked at Taunton Association for the Homeless for 2 years as communications coordinator before really a bit of encouragement from senior team to say, you could be really good at this. And I was like, okay, if I really want to do communications, I don't have a degree. and I don't really know what I'm doing, any rigor or theory or anything. So I did a year of internships and I could only afford paid ones. So I was lucky to find paid public relations internship in just outside Weston-super-Mare. And I lied and said I could drive because it was in the middle of nowhere. And instead I got 3-hour bus there and back. If anyone lives on the border of Somerset and they pass like Breen and anything, or anything that was going to the kind of all of the coastal caravan parks, they took that bus. A PR internship. And Cassidy, she's watching this. She taught me how to do PR. She's an amazing influencer now on Instagram and does amazing marketing. And she really gave me the confidence. And then I did a digital marketing internship in Bristol and a social media marketing internship. And they were all paid, very scrappy, but it was a good. By the time people had left university of my age, I had 2 years work experience and 3 internships. So it meant that I accidentally skipped a lot of developmental stuff and felt really proud to immediately then be able to get a job in an organization in Bristol as a communications assistant around the same time that other people were doing internships. And the rest is history. I went into always then had communications jobs. Because of the way that charities work, you would be not just communications, it would be communications and marketing assistant, communications and fundraising. And I think that's a really cool thing, actually. I think like attaching your communications to a name, it does well. And yeah, it meant that I'm a bit of it felt like a jack of all trades, but I was very grateful that I had lots of really good CEOs and senior leadership who saw that I had like an insatiable need to learn, potentially to make up for lost time of being getting expelled.
This is brilliant because I think for me, being a leader is about showing other people support. And like what you said, your first CEO was saying, I think you're really good at this. And I think there's something here for you. And being able to help you figure that out. Because I think it is hard, isn't it? I think nobody, the person I had on last week said to me, nobody plans to go into comms and PR. We fall into it and then we have to learn it. And some people, yes, do a degree. Some people do training courses or do things later on. But the main thing is people supporting you. And you mentioned, what's the name of the lady you said, the influencer? Angela. So again, another person who's able to support you with what you were doing. And what made you stay in the third sector and continue going instead of trying something else? Or have you tried other things too?
I tried to work for a skateboarding brand for 3 months and I hated it. And I think that maybe one of the reasons why I didn't do so well at school is because I hadn't yet figured out that I really need to be like in love with something to throw my all at it. And I'm half interested in something. I really struggled. And for me, I'm quite values led. And it took me all sorts of scrapes to realize that if I love something and I care about it, I'm there in spirit, soul, body, everything. And I love social change. And I particularly love advocating for people who come from a similar background to me. And I guess I experienced some housing inequality. We moved around a bit with my mum, who was amazing, by the way. I had been in rooms that I lived in with my mum and my sister. And that really meant a lot to me to contribute back. So when I worked in homelessness and housing charities, I felt really connected to the issue, whilst also feeling really distant from it, because one of the reasons that we're going to talk about in this podcast, I hope, is that my now love of communications is shining more realistic lights on things. And my introduction to homelessness was the kind of more fundraising Christmas, typically male, white bearded, rough sleeper in an alleyway kind of image that was really something used to conjure fundraising urgency. And I never felt that I looked like that. And I didn't feel that I was meeting people that looked like that. And the stats agree that the whole picture of homelessness isn't like that. So I stayed because I was both in love with supporting it and also hated it a bit.
I completely agree with you. I always get frustrated when I see fundraising ads where you've got African babies with a fly in their eye, or like you said, homelessness, but in a really rough way, but without saying there are families on the street at the moment. Like this day and age, it's not just one individual and his dog. You know, we're talking about families not having homes or temporary housing, or you see it quite a lot in the news. And you're right, we should be fighting for people and explaining really what is going on out there. So just to move on and talk a little bit about your current role and with all the other sort of experience that you've had, what is like the one campaign that you're really proud of and why?
There's probably two campaigns I'm really proud of. The first one was when I was at Kerry in Bristol as the head of marketing, communications, and fundraising. So, again, another nod to all the one-man bands out there. And I was gifted the responsibility probably a bit earlier than I should have been. So, I'd like to thank Ben Richardson, my CEO at the time, who gave me a lot of trust with a Christmas homelessness campaign. And I was absolutely dogmatic alongside that we wouldn't use stigmatizing images, and really felt like the theory and the data was there to say that people don't need them to feel urgency, and really put a lot of work into a Christmas homeless campaign in around 2019, just before COVID, called The Little City That Can. And it was a kind of joined up animation that was more of an activist call to action for Bristol to be able to be the first city that solved homelessness. And it used a lot of like brand identity and brand signifiers to the people of Bristol that said that there was a hopeful and optimistic way out of this, rather than the kind of stigmatizing idea that it was a bit of a hopeless cause. So it really set people's hearts on fire, and it did really well. And we used an animation, and we made an interactive campaign. So borrowing from political posters that you would put in your window to signify who you might vote for, we sent out in cold mail and warm mail loads of posters for people to say, make homelessness history in Bristol. And you could walk through Bristol and see them in people's doorways. And then it was a bit of a signifier, a bit of network marketing, a bit of a kind of who's done that. And I think probably just to add some context, Caring in Bristol does a lot of amazing things for those who are preventing homelessness, diversion from homelessness, and also for those who are currently experiencing homelessness in temporary accommodation and those sleeping rough. And it struggles at Christmas because Crisis at Christmas, I love Crisis as an organization, was a dominating kind of brand. And we would get people in Bristol donate to Crisis at Christmas, not knowing that there wasn't a Crisis at Christmas in Bristol. But Caring in Bristol did hold that space. They put on Caring at Christmas every year and Bristol's Big Roast Dinner, which feeds about 800 to 900 people experiencing all sorts of homelessness and housing vulnerability. And it was really important to show that there was something going on your doorstep. So the only thing that we had that Crisis didn't, because Crisis is brilliant, serves an amazing purpose in other cities, was that we were local. So we really had to get across that there was something happening on their doorstep, and we had to do that with a lot of Bristol imagery, Bristol wording. We didn't need to use any photography or any of the traditional kind of language that happened. And I was so proud to do that, and very lucky that people let me take a chance. I had to show all the working out and had to do all the strategizing behind it so that I could get board and senior leadership team buy-in. But yeah, I was felt really, and we used lots of local artists to represent homelessness in the area. And that was kickstarted my love for kind of bigger communications campaigns, because before that I hadn't started any. And I'd say latterly, recently, last Christmas, I was representing Switchback as their head of influencing. We were really trying to elevate the role of effective resettlement for when people leave prison, the gap in service support and holistic support that it just isn't available for someone when they leave those prison gates. Switchback solution is peer mentorship, really intensive peer mentorship. But we were trying to move the dial in political thinking and public consciousness. And people said it couldn't be done. There's a real kind of idea that you can't get those types of kind of positive criminal justice stories in the wider media, particularly at a kind of broadsheet level. And we were able to win the Times and Sunday Times Christmas appeal. It took a long bit of work, but it resulted in about 10 to 12 articles really highlighted the men at the heart of the campaign for their ingenuity, their own goals, their hobbies, their talents, the fact that they are next to you on the bus, and rightfully they work alongside you, and they're brilliant. And yeah, that was really great to work with the Times on that Christmas appeal, and really great to work with the amazing team at Switchback who are still there, Dan and Amy. Loved working with them. And really great again to have a CEO, Sean Williams, who trusted the process, because that took a few years to lead up to that ability to go for that campaign. And it did really well. It was in print, digital, social. I hope it gives other justice organizations, third sector, the confidence that you can have those elevated media profiles with all the risks mitigated that can move the dial of public consciousness in an optimistic way,
Yeah.
and not to fear that level of media
Yes.
attention.
And most of the people who'll be listening to this are comms people. So we've all tried to get a newspaper Christmas appeal of the year and all that, charity of the year. What do you think made it stand out for you? Why were the Times happy to do that with you?
Probably to say that I approached that media appeal like an influencing campaign and had done a lot of stakeholder management work about a year before then. We had worked with the brilliant Times data team on a data-led story around effective resettlement and recall, and how prison recall, for those who don't know, is when you are out on license. For the remainder of your license, you can be recalled to prison at any point if it is deemed by a probation officer, who might not even be your probation officer, that you have not met the terms of your license. And that could be anything from smoking on the porch of your appropriate accommodation to swearing at a probation officer, all the way to the bigger things, a threat at kind of risk of violence or risk of reoffending to yourself or the community. But we were largely seeing it as the more minor infractions resulting in recall. We worked with the Times data team to really highlight that recall was both a symptom and a kind of proponent of ineffective resettlement. The fear of recall being over people's head was having this in the round effect of people not also engaging. And we were able to approach the data team with that data, with the human stories behind it, working with our experts, our experience board, who had flagged the recall. I think that came about when you have an influencing and a media team that works hand in glove with service delivery, and they work in the same office, and there is a kind of symbiotic exchange of ideas and goals. And yeah, when we worked with that data team, we were so grateful to work with Anisha Menzies, who is one of the journalists there. And I just kept in touch, really believe that effective media management is the same way that you would go about policy or public affairs type of campaigning, or even major donor fundraising. If you're going to make it that extreme, grants management, once have media contact, that person is getting a Christmas card. They are being invited. I'm remaining conversational with them if you're able to do that. And I would really see those media contacts as just as impactful, necessary as creating change as a minister. And yeah, we worked with that data team, and I was lucky to see that they soon started turning to us for more specialist information. And by the time it came to apply for the Sunday Times Christmas appeal, we had also been working on how we were going to put forward those stories. And we chose to not work with we don't have ambassadors, and I'm a bit have my negatives and positives of anointed ambassadors, but we chose to actually just reach out to anyone who we thought might have a kind of shared goal of justice reform. And we largely focused on people in popular culture. So we were lucky to work with David Johnson and Tom Blythe in the new Wasteland film, which we consulted on. And I just made sure that we've got those names on, and we made sure that the popular culture people who we were able to be friendly with also represented maybe a story of a young man, so that we were always tying the story of a person to a kind of someone in more popular culture. And yeah, it meant that not only did the Times already have a relationship with us, but we were able to meet the needs of almost every one of their publications or every one of their readers and audiences, hobbies and passions. A big belief of mine is that you don't need to try and get people to care. They already care. We just haven't spoken to them in the language of how they see the world. And people don't see the world necessarily through the eyes of the cause that they want to support. They do see the world through the music they like, or the recipes they cook, or the kind of place where they spend their free time, like a gallery. So if you can meet their needs, you show how your cause interacts with that passion they have, you're onto a winner. So we designed our offer to the Times and Sunday Times based on not only platforming the men's ingenuity and their talents, but matching that talent to a reader base of the Times. We were the first prison and justice adjacent charity to ever be put forward for that. And I'm not sure that's always because we were so great. I just wonder how many other justice organizations would have applied for that. I'm not sure many did. So it's like me saying it was an amazing accolade. I also have to temper that with, I wonder how many other justice organizations could have applied for that, not realizing that they would have been appropriate with the right preparation or right kind of knowledge, because they should be brave and apply for that. It worked really well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's about understanding what they want, what the Times wants, what they need. Like you said, you went through the newspaper, you went to find out what the stories were that they were interested in, and then you are able to then provide them with the numbers and the stories and the data. And I think that is exactly what these sort of appeals are about. And I've worked on a few myself, and some of them are very specific. They want so and so with blue hair, and this has happened, and this has happened. And you're like, well, I don't have that, but actually, what I have is even better. And being able to offer them, but it does require a lot of preparedness.
I
And
think probably it took me about a year or two to consider that we were appropriate to apply for that. And I don't want that to put anyone off going for those, but it just shows that organisation, it wasn't to be sniffed at. We really cared about our offering and the way that we were going to approach it and then steward it to a really successful completion.
I think this segues really nicely onto I know what you're very passionate about is changing mindset about sort of justice reform and kind of like where you think people should be taking risks at their messaging and that sort of stuff. So you talked about you want to challenge the Cinderella cause when we were having a chat the other day. So tell me more about that. Tell me about what your theory is and how you would like to see the sector change.
I think it's really interesting to enter a sector that's so how necessary it is. But I think I introduced myself to you initially by saying I have a real want to be on this podcast because I'm evangelic about, again, people care more than you think. I think that it's self-prophesying to believe that one of the biggest barriers to success is public perception, or that media presentation of your cause is an inhibitant to you reaching the right audiences. And I will be sat in rooms frequently where people go, how do we get the media to care about us? Or how do we get the media on side? Which I find really interesting. How do we get the media on side? Like they're a homogenous, kind of amorphous kind of thing. Board members feeling that an elevation of the cause elevates risk without kind of realizing there are many things in that journey that can mitigate that or make it a much more positive experience. I think justice organizations maybe have been burnt, and I think there's many ways in which you can navigate that. And I think people often see media representation of justice as the more negative side without recognizing the many different media formats and the many different routes into media. And yeah, I really wanted to give people the courage that I do believe that thinking that the media or public perception is a barrier to being really confident about communicating your cause is self-prophesying in nature, that if you believe it, then that's how you will introduce yourself to the world. Now is the time for communications leaders and not followers. You can go out there and say something. And if you feel confident in your conviction, that really is a positive asset to society. And you have the data and the rigor and the evidence to back that up, then you should do that. And you should be confident in how that is going to place in the world. Even the way that they engage with the media or how they engage with maybe unrestricted fundraising or how they invest in marketing or owned media, like your digital media, your video or your podcasts or even your photography to some extent. A part of me feels a bit sad that maybe years of not being confident in that has put the justice sector slightly behind where it could be compared to, say, homelessness, where you get quite pioneering organizations like Shelter who really redesigned a lot of their communications to represent the present homelessness landscape. They really took on board a lot of the kind of theory around not platforming images that reinforce negative stereotypes. When you look at Shelter's communications, it doesn't rely on stigmatizing images. It does not reinforce stereotype. It pushes the drive forward, and yet they have not in any way been inhibited by that. In fact, I feel them being more positively received than ever. I'm happy for people to challenge me on that one. Maybe someone from Shelter is going to ring me up and be like, you have no idea what you're on about. I would happily have that. But I do think just to have that confidence, and if you're not confident enough at navigating media because you feel like it's out of your control, then your own media, how you present yourself to the world, how you invest in that. If you break the media process down into manageable chunks so that it doesn't feel overwhelming, there is the values which you attach to your organization and how you approach them in every manner of what you do. They're not just something that you say that you do, but how they are integrated and porous throughout your organization. How that interacts with how you work alongside people and prepare them, the preparation process. I don't really like the idea of the classic consent form. I think it's a barrier to working alongside people in a way where it is them putting their story first in a way that feels good for them. Switchback should be a footnote, not the headline. And if you work with someone in that vein, and you can see that they're doing it for their own reason and their own goal, the idea that they would in any way be a reputational damage to your organization is lesser than, because you're actually putting yourself on the back foot for that person's experience. How you work with the journalist. I think people are worried about, oh, we could tell a really good story to a really good journalist, and then as soon as it goes out to the media, how it's absorbed. Well, yes, you can't control everything as part of the media process because you are not the journalist. You could have an amazing journalist that's incredibly skilled and incredibly adaptive and incredibly empathetic, and then their pitch editor does the picture you don't like. The sub editor does the subheading that kind of picks on the wording that is not values led from your organization. The headline has been social media algorithm to death to the point where it no longer represents anything to do with you. In which case, acknowledge that you do not have control of that and instead put your energy into what you can control. So you can control how you prepare someone and the reason that they're doing it for. You can control how you evaluate success of that media piece. You just can. It's not then up for you to just put the media piece out in the world and use the typical kind of like communications quantitative assessments, reach, clicks, and go, oh, okay, that's happened now. If you've put a piece out there and you aren't happy with the pictures, the subheading, then you should evaluate that as such and communicate that back to your board and senior leadership and use that to either A, never interact with that journalist or publication again, or B, start rethinking how you then approach those and how you also design your kind of impact process around that.
And there's also different types of media, right? So we're not just thinking about newspapers. There's all sorts of ways. There's like podcasts like what we're on today, in-depth ways of talking and having a conversation with people, because you're right, like those interviews where you get 30 seconds or if you're lucky or an inch or whatever on the old school way of measuring things of a quote, one line of your quote. You've written this really long quote and you've got one line in it, it's not going to be the be all and end all. It's all the things that you're doing, isn't it? And thinking about leadership that you mentioned just now, how would you say your leadership has evolved during your career, kind of as you've moved through the ranks, as it were?
I used to be a bit of a kind of like interesting person to manage because I was always desperate for more responsibility and yet very kind of shaking fists, like, oh, those people won't let me do what I want. And I've tempered over the years. I totally understand why some decisions have been made now, and I've eaten more humble pie than I care to admit. And that's a good thing because I now totally understand why there's someone in my team who's really aggrieved or frustrated about something. And I think that's a good thing because they really care. And I really do think that the best way to lead is with total humility. That I often try and go into teams thinking you should build the people in this team up so that one day you are no longer necessary. I really think that the goal is that everyone is autonomous on their own journey to progression. And I really like to meet teams and say to individuals, what's your goal? What do you want to be? Do you want to be a director of communications? Do you want to be a CEO? In which case, find that dream job. Find the person on LinkedIn. For me, at one point, it was the CEO of Women in Prison, and I still think I would love that job. But you can find what they've done on LinkedIn and literally just copy them, or find that job online and look at the job description, and I will help you do it, because it's not what you do for the organization; it's what that organization can do for you. And how can we meet your needs, and really fulfilling people in that way, and really taking a step back and going, how can this team work when I am not in the room, and how can they thrive? And I always try and think, if you're really good at your job, there'll be loads of opportunities. So there shouldn't be like a scarcity mindset. So when it comes to you could go on that radio show or that panel or that on telly, it's never try and meet that as, oh, if I'm good at my job, there'll be more opportunities of this. So please give that out to as many other people as possible. I think a big thing is just really caring about the small things. I'm really keen to still do really impactful one-to-ones as many times as possible. I'm really keen to be held to account. Making someone feel safe to say that they didn't feel happy with something really means a lot to me. And I hope that people I've worked with have had that come back. And also being a bit brave. I do think you should try and create the conditions where you can do the crazy idea, because no ideas are crazy if there's thought and process behind it, really. But yeah, really making space for those emergent ideas, making space in your overarching strategy to do the thing that someone feels really wedded to occasionally. I think will always pay dividends, because that's the grace that I was given when I was on the up. And some of the best campaigns I've ever done are because the CEO went, we should do her crazy idea. And it always paid back, came back to me tenfold. So you've got to do that for other people.
I guess that being brave, as you say, is not only the way you do comms, as you say, but also being brave to allow somebody else to take a punt and try something that you've not tried before. There is a risk, but maybe that risk is worth it, isn't it?
I think if you manage, if you teach someone this theory and you make sure that something's, evidence led, they think in fundraising, the two magnets for success are if something is professionalized and rationalized. And they mean, have you got the skills to make it follow through? And rationalize, is it based on data or assumption? And if something is based on what we know with the right data and there's a bit of evidence there, either internally or externally, and if someone has skills to follow it through, and then you have all the right kind of energy behind it and it is the right time, why wouldn't it work?
Absolutely. And just moving on to thinking about the future of comms, how do you see the role of comms changing in the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
I think I always say that I'm not a big fan of the word comms to my lovely communications and policy manager, Lottie. I would say the goal of my job in an organization, beyond creating the right environment for my team to thrive and the cause to thrive, is just getting the right people defined by you to take meaningful action defined by us. And that is entirely what communications, marketing, policy, public affairs, events, fundraising is. And I always think, how is that organization just creating the right environment for the people you want to take meaningful action? And I hope that people almost stop minimizing communications and see it for a strategic need. And I hope that organizations where communications becomes, it's more communications management that's quite functional, because it's serving just a very kind of day-to-day purpose, which is really important. But I hope those organizations that are smaller, where that communications fundraising marketing person is a one-man band, is allowed to be strategic, because I think that just minimizing communications to its functionality and to just doing day-to-day or advertorial updates on social media, which I hate, because if you're just using it as a one-way kind of messaging board, you've lost it. But actually thinking, how are we going to get the right people to take meaningful action? That's all we need to do.
Yeah.
So I think, a future of communications is almost the word in itself, just making it so much more integrated, really seeing its strategic need. And I really want people to invest in getting the right people to take meaningful action. You can call it whatever you want.
That idea of strategic communications, being able to say, actually, what we do is strategic. It is about the overall organization and the business needs, the charity needs, whatever that is. And we should be aligning our strategy with the business. So if it is about programs, if it is about fundraising, whatever that is, we need to make sure it's all aligned. And like you said, it's not just about our outputs, it's about outcomes, the difference that we're making and the change that we're making, maybe the influence that you're making in policy or things like that. That is so important. And that's what we stand for, really.
I think moving beyond just advertising your outputs to working with people to show the future of your impact, people can't imagine what it's like for someone to be in prison, but they can imagine a future where they don't have to walk home carrying their keys in their hand. And you could tell someone that we're on a journey to that. People want to know that their daughter is able to walk home safe after she's been out with her friends in her uni town. Well, why don't you communicate how we're going to get that to happen? As opposed to, here's our program where we served people with Oyster cards. We know that effective travel prison leavers is going to really help them thrive and not reoffend, but that person doesn't necessarily need to hear that. And I also think, I'm not of tech adverse, but to rehash what I've said, I would go back to basics. I get worried about the assumptions that happen with communications and marketing. It's something where people really seem to go on gut instinct, or seem to go on an idea of what they should be doing, or an idea of what they believe is happening. What's your impact? What are your values? What is the future society that you are part of building? If AI is going to reach the audience in a meaningful way, go for it. And I also think hyper local. People are really missing the opportunity to speak to the person who is the local blogger, the person who does the local mailing list. After lots of local journalists didn't get, after local news media was made a lot redundant, and those people went off and set up really cool, like mailing lists, Substacks. They're still writing about those really good stories in that neighborhood. Like, I really think back to basics, and I really hope it does some amazing things for research and how you can navigate certain messaging to certain groups and rationalizing your data compared to external data. Love it. Audience to take meaningful action.
One final question for you. You already mentioned your history and how you did in your younger days. So, what one piece of advice would you give your younger self if you could?
I wish I could give my younger self a hug. I felt like such a loser at school. And I remember getting expelled and feeling like I'd really let everyone down and certainly let myself down. And I wish I could just say to her, you were doing what you could with what you had at the time and to just keep on going. I have to really remind myself that younger me would think older me is so cool. Maybe not. I don't know if that's a cool thing to say. I really did at one point say to myself, when I first got told by Justin Roxburgh, you can be a communications person, I did think to myself, oh, one day I'd love to be CEO of Women in Prison or something like that. And I pinched myself that I work in a justice environment as a director alongside like a CEO, Pavan at Revolving Doors. And I love her and think she's a bit of a hero of mine. I can't believe that I'm doing this. So I think I'd want to just give myself a hug and say, keep going.
Lovely. That's really nice. So, that's a wonderful thing to end on. You wanted to give your younger self a hug. And I think we all would want that actually at that age. And without knowing where we were going and what we were doing, really difficult at school. I'm sure lots of people could resonate with that. And but our lives are not linear. I call it squiggly. My life has gone back and forth until we finally decide what we want to do. It is like that. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. It's been a privilege. What a joy to be able to talk about myself so much.
I'm sure lots of people will learn from it and it will resonate with them as well. So that's fantastic. So that's it for this episode of the Comms Collective. And a huge thank you to Antonia May Cross for sharing her insights and experiences. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow the podcast on your favourite app so you never miss an episode. It would mean the world to me if you could rate and review the show. It helps more comms professionals like you discover these stories. And of course, join the conversation online, share this episode on social media, and tag us using hashtag the Comms Collective. Thank you for listening. I'm Vishnu Sontu, and I look forward to bringing you more honest, inspiring conversations